how would we ever afford all the technology?
Well, let me point out, I'll address the schools first because I really don't want this to be a political event, although I do believe the president has taken very important steps, including closing off travel with China, something that the Democrats opposed. But let's go to the schools, which is a current issue. Almost all of the studies show that for the primary grades, children are not particularly vulnerable to this virus. It is very rare. For example, right here in the United States, the CDC reports many fewer children have succumbed to COVID-19 than to the ordinary flu. And we never closed the schools because of the flu. A New Zealand study points out that in that country, albeit a smaller country, not one teacher was ever infected by students in the schools. So we have a lot of evidence, which is why the major pediatric organization in the United States has urged opening up the schools, because there's a terrible cost in terms of health to children who are deprived of their ability to go to school. As for the technologies that I've mentioned, actually, there is a lot of money that's been proposed for the schools. The key here is that shutting down the economy is far more costly than investing in technologies to enable the economy to open up safely.
Jack in Michigan, Republican. Jack,
yeah,
good morning.
Betsy, she's awesome. Great job. She needs to get more of herself out there. I would like to say yes, Trump. When the epidemic first came out, everybody was confused. Everybody trying to blame somebody about, the virus once it got here. Hard to do. It did come from China. We know that. Let's fix the problem. Keep up the good work, Betsy. Have a great day.
Thank you. Let me at this point just interject another set of facts. And actually, the president, I was very surprised, included a bit of this in his speech last night. I've seen columns like Paul Krugman's column in the New York Times saying, if only the United States were more like Italy, right? So I would urge everyone watching who's particularly interested in this to go to the Johns Hopkins website. Every day it's updated to include the facts comparing what's happening in each country on COVID-19. And one of the most important things to look at is the case fatality rate and also deaths per million population. And you will see that despite Paul Krugman's claim that you'd be better off in Italy, the fact is the United States is doing much better than many of these European countries on saving lives from the coronavirus. For example, when I look at the case fatality rate, 3.2% in the US. In the UK, it's nearly 15%. In Spain, 8%. In France, 12%. So even Germany is a bit higher. So once you get COVID-19, your chances of surviving it are significantly better if you're treated in a hospital in the US than in Europe. Now, of course, that doesn't include the chances of getting the infection. So that's why you would look at the second set of figures, deaths per million population. And there again, the United States is doing significantly better than the UK, than Spain, than Sweden, a little higher infection rate than France. But overall, it is unfair when people say, if only the US were doing as well as Europe. The fact is we are doing quite well compared with most European countries. I would say only Germany has exceeded our performance.
Warlock is in Hollywood, Alabama, Democratic caller. Good morning to you. Question or comment?
I have a comment about President Trump and how he's dealt with the pandemic. And I think that he's gone against the science, okay, by trying to let the governors be the people who are responsible for reacting to the virus, especially in the early stages. He seemed like he didn't want to have a national response. He wanted to shrink federal government, and so he wanted the governors to be the ones that dealt with the pandemic and not himself and his administration.
Well, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. So let me address it in two ways. One is constitutionally. It is the governors under their state constitutions that have the authority, not the president, to lock down businesses, to require people to wear a mask, and to issue other emergency health edicts. The president does not have that authority. Secondly, I would urge you to look at the size of the United States. It would be like the European Union imposing a one-size-fits-all plan on all of the countries from Germany all the way to France, Spain, Portugal, Greece. It would not have worked because, like the European Union, in the United States, this virus has moved from one part of the country to another. There was a serious lockdown in New York and New Jersey. In my view, it was unsuccessful. Those two states have the highest deaths per capita of any states in the nation from COVID-19. But it would have been extremely foolish to lock down Arizona, for example, when the pandemic was peaking on the East Coast and there were very few cases in those other places. So the very size and breadth and variation within the continent of the United States makes that kind of one-size-fits-all national plan scientifically unwise. Now, let me say one more thing about science now that you've brought it up. Hindsight is 2020, so I will say that we now have the benefit of hindsight. I'm not criticizing the scientists who urged our country to shut down, but I will say that they used partial reasoning. They did what they thought was necessary to minimize the number of infections and deaths from COVID-19. But they didn't take into consideration the huge suffering and death. I'm not talking about economic consequences, the huge suffering and death as a consequence of the shutdown itself. For example, we know that every 1% uptick in the unemployment rate produces a 3.3% increase in opioid addiction deaths, and we see those soaring now. We also know it produces a 0.99, almost 1% increase in suicides. We know it produces more alcoholism, all deaths of despair. That was not taken into consideration by the scientists who only looked with a laser focus on how to reduce the COVID-19 infections. But we know that an unemployed person is 63% more likely to die than somebody who has a job. And we are seeing all the terrible effects of the shutdown now, the health effects. And that's why it is so important to plan ahead for the next pandemic or a resurgence of this virus in a way that makes a shutdown absolutely not the solution that we will consider a second time.